Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host.
Hi, everybody. This is Doreen Cumberford, and I'm with you today with Linda Mueller.
Hello, everyone.
Today on our repatriation diaries, we are talking about logistics. This is one of the themes for this week. And as far as possible, we are going to tie in all of the episodes that we release this week with the theme of logistics. Now, you know that logistics are big. Whether you've got one suitcase or 3 containers, there's a lot to think about when you're moving. So I'm just going to go through the list, and Linda's going to give me her feedback. Maybe I could throw in a couple of stories. And if you're listening to this, and you're about to repatriate, we hope that this is useful for the future. If you're listening to this and you have already repatriated, there's a good possibility you might have to go again and do this once more. So this is the lesson that keeps on giving. And what if it could be the most inspiring time of your life?
What I'd like to just throw in there, if people who have repatriated are listening and they have other ideas that they think we should add to the list, we would love to hear from you. So share whatever comes up for you as well. And you can contact us via the information in our show notes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda, for that. Yeah. So logistical aspects of an international move. First thing that comes to mind. What's the first thing that comes to your mind, Linda?
I'm just having a vision of boxes.
Me too. I'm just having a vision of a mess. I recently expatriated again 2 years ago, and that is just too close for comfort. And when I think about the mess, packing and shipping, deciding what to leave and what to take. Now, when you're making these decisions, we think the decisions are easy, but we get decision fatigue, especially after we're in a certain generation, or after a certain time of day, or perhaps according to your natural body rhythms. We all run into a wall where we can only decide so many things in a day. So deciding what to take and what to leave behind is huge in repatriation, because I have done it a few times, brought things home that were totally inappropriate. I would recommend hiring professional movers, or packing, whether you're packing yourself or hiring a mover. If you have the option that you're with a corporation, or if you're a diplomat, or if you're with a mission and someone is packing you up, the best thing to do is stay on top of it and use all the resources. Get to know what your mobility package is. What are you entitled to? What are you not entitled to? What do you want to spend extra money perhaps on doing, especially when it comes to things like shipping pets back? And getting cost estimates. Are you required to do that, or is your relocation company doing that for you? All of these things have to be wrangled. And above and beyond all of that is, I would say, the 2 best parts of any repatriation for me, or any expatriation now, are the first box that goes in the truck, like things that you're not going to need. But that last box, the first box you want out of the truck, perhaps it has things like screwdrivers to assemble other things, or open other things, or build furniture, or access a safe. So I think that box is absolutely critical, is that first box that you need when you open up the truck that has all of these types of things. What do you think, Linda? Do you have a box like that you love?
I don't know if I've actually had a box like that, to be honest with you, but I definitely have made sure that our boxes were always very well marked so that we knew what was in them and that we could find what we needed pretty quickly. I think, although we don't always have the luxury of time when we're preparing to go, the more that you can do on the front end, the easier it is on the back end. And there's been times when I've had plenty of notice and I thought I've gotten rid of as much as I ever could. And then I would unpack at the other end and think, why did I bring this? And why did I bring that? But, it's whatever you can do to front load the effort. If you have the luxury of time, I think that's kind of an expert tip to throw out there.
That is an expert tip, because I think that we can save ourselves so much time in the packing it and absolutely paring down. Less is more. How many times do we hear that? It sounds so trite now, but in actual fact, it does give me a sense of freedom when I take less.
For sure. But I don't want to get ahead, but also related to this is giving things away to friends and
Oh, yeah.
selling things. I think sometimes we've moved very unexpectedly and we have things that we were less than a year old that we couldn't take with us. And I always found it so comforting to go through things and say, here's the give pile, meaning to friends. Here's the donate pile and here's the sell pile if there's the luxury of time to actually sell the things of the most value. But giving things to friends, I just find so heartwarming. So I think that helps for those of us that tend to have some pack rat tendencies.
This is a little bit off the topic, but I really want to share the story right now. One of my best friends in her early 70s married this Englishman, and he had lived in the US for 30 something years, and he was really desperate to repatriate back to England. That was his dream. And so they got married on May 1st. And during the wedding, she explained to people that there was very little she could take. She was only planning on taking like 20 boxes. So she invited people to go through her closet, to go through her wardrobe, to go through her library and her jewelry box and everything. Well, I just had a conversation with her last weekend. She said she would not recommend that.
Did she not pre-sort before she invited everyone?
Somewhat, but things like clothes that she really needed went missing. Clothes she was planning on taking went missing.
That's interesting.
If you are going to be doing a large giveaway like that, make it very clear, a very clear delineation where those things are and the things that must not be touched. Because I just thought that was the funniest repatriation logistics story I had heard in a long time.
That is a unique way of disposing of one's items.
It is a very generous way. And of course, you can do things like have an estate sale. You can do garage sales, lots of work. Even estate sales can take a lot of time and energy. There are people who will come in, and especially now there are lots and lots of consignment stores and resale stores. In most countries, we have resale stores. And then, of course, there's good old IKEA. What would we do without IKEA as expats, Linda?
It's true, especially in the Middle East.
Yeah, well,
actually, all three places I lived, I had IKEA.
Exactly. IKEA has saved our lives more than once in the US, the UK, the Middle East, Japan, and somewhere else. But anyway, I highly recommend IKEA.
Well, I think we could probably talk about this for hours, but I think we've hit the high level hot topics.
Travel arrangements. That can sometimes be tricky because a lot of it can depend on children's schooling. It can depend on corporate needs. It can depend on assignment and contract variations. What have you contracted to? And do you need to be out of the country or by a certain date? What are your visa requirements as far as being in that country? All of those sorts of things. Do you have to book flights or are you making alternative transportation? Now, along with that goes with not only transporting your own self and your own body, but you possibly have handling pets. We were shipping a dog out of Saudi Arabia, and we had to ship her, I believe, almost 2.5 months to 3 months before the time we were flying because of the heat conditions in an aircraft. And it was absolutely life saving that we sent her early because she would not have been able to fly during certain months. So handling your pets, getting them out, getting all the documentation for that so that your pets can fly, whether they're cats, dogs, or lizards. I do have a funny story about that too. And if applicable, securing temporary accommodation and where are you going to land and making sure that do they take pets. Do they take children? And do they take pets? And what is the composition of your family? What are your particular needs? So, travel arrangements sound like, oh, that's an easy thing to do, but I've heard it become fairly complex.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up some good points. I think two thoughts come to mind. One is, for those of you that are on the front end of expatriation, especially if you're on a corporate contract, make sure you get all of this in writing, because many of a so-called gentleman's agreement have been made. And then when it's time for families to leave, management has changed or something else has happened where all of a sudden the promises made are not holding up. And I've seen it. Thankfully, it's not happened to me, but I've seen it happen to close friends. And it's really painful because it really can impact your repatriation, number one. And number two, it makes me think, again, stories with friends, like it's a good idea to have a support team put together, because like you mentioned, with having to send your dog 2 months in advance, there are times when I've seen people have to leave prior to their pet leaving, and you want to make sure you have somebody on the ground providing support, on either end, wherever it's needed, because you can't always match up. I mean, some countries have quarantine requirements and whatnot. You can't always match up timing.
There's climate to be considered with pets, and there's quarantine, there's paperwork. Sometimes you have to get the vaccination certificate within 48 hours of flying. And it's really important to find out what are all those tricky parts. I have someone I interviewed not long ago, and she was flying 5 large dogs out of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, goodness.
And I think they got held up by 48 hours due to the veterinary situation. So it's really important that you are very aware, and that, like Linda said, that it's in writing. Also, just want to touch on a little bit here, and this is a little bit of a tricky subject, and that is when you have an unexpected repatriation, one that was unplanned. Now, I had one that was unplanned from Dubai a long time ago. I know you've had unplanned ones, Linda. How would you suggest that people approach an unplanned repatriation as far as their logistics is concerned? What difference does that make?
I think the bottom line is you have to figure out what are the negotiables and the non-negotiables. And then of the things that are negotiable, what are your priorities? Because there's time, there's money, there's some things that you can't really put money on. Like, you have to move a pet. There's people that I have said to me, oh my goodness, I got a dog while I was living abroad. I had no idea how much time and money. It costs more than a human's airplane ticket a lot of times to get a pet home with you. So I think when it comes down to any sort of repatriation, it's sort of like, what are your priorities? How much time do you have? And what are the other constraints that you have to consider? I mean, I've been fortunate that I've never had to leave like in the middle of the night. Like, I've always had some warning, but sometimes more than others.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And all of these things, actually, they don't make a difference in the moment, but they might make a difference in hindsight. Because as you're processing repatriation, you're not only using the gift of hindsight, you're also usually projecting ahead into the new life that you're building. So you're trying to build hindsight with some foresight together. So this is very critical. Next part, number 3, documentation and paperwork. Oh, don't you love this? I was so grateful that I had a husband to get out of Saudi Arabia. I thought I was never going to get out of there because our documentation and paperwork was very lengthy. There was like 120 documents or something. It was. We needed visas, permits, clearances. You had to make sure that every car or every boat or every large item that was like that had been sold and had been properly sold to somebody, and you had all the documentation lined up, even if you'd been there and somebody got stuck there for 9 months once because he didn't have the paperwork for a car that he'd sold 20 years before.
Oh, goodness.
It's really important that you keep all the documentation and the paperwork. Permits, employment transfers. Are you staying with the same company? Are you transferring to a new department? Do you have academic records that you are taking with you? And what about your professional credentials? Have you changed your profession, or have you upped your credentials during the process? Do you have all of that paperwork, or do you have it digitally now? And dealing with tax implications and financial obligations before you leave, it's a good idea to know, especially if you're in a US tax situation where we are taxed when we live overseas. It's very important to understand and have your head wrapped around at least the big factors of those implications and all of those obligations that you have.
We've always had a red folder. Now, we started living abroad as a family in 2004, so things weren't digitized like they are today, but we always had a red folder, and all of the important documents went in that folder so that we knew A, where everything was, and B, if we had to access it quickly, we knew where it was. So I definitely recommend that sort of thing. And if it's an electronic folder, then just make sure you have it organized, because you never know, sometimes when you're moving, if you're trying to register your child at a school in a new location, if you can't quickly access the documents that they need, it's a problem. The other thing that I would highly recommend is if you're living in a country where you're being given very important documents in a language that you cannot read, make sure that you very clearly mark what they are, even if you can't get the whole thing translated, because we were in a situation where we were very careful about getting everything. Our daughter was born in Tokyo, so we were very careful about keeping all the important documents. There was one tricky document that didn't have a Post-it note on it, and we got rid of it at one point. And in retrospect, I think we just had sort of the decision fatigue, sort of like, okay, just get rid of it. Yeah. We came to find out after a lot of legwork that was actually her Japanese birth certificate.
Oh, geez.
So all we had was the consular birth certificate, which is not good enough for whatever we were trying to do at the time. And so we actually had to get in touch with the authorities back in Tokyo and get it sent to us. And it's not the original, which was a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to get proof that it was legal. And anyway, it was a job and a half. And the funny thing is my husband and I both remember throwing away. We remember discussing the piece of paper and throwing it away. And it created a lot of work. So just be careful with those things.
Yes, these things can create a huge amount of work and unintended consequences that we can't even begin to consider at this point. So definitely very, very important to have all those documents. I like the idea of the file being read also. I would like to add to that a little bit about death and dying. I've recently been working and I've delivered a couple of seminars on death and dying as an expat. But death and dying as a repat, if you have made an investment in the country that you're in, and or if you have actually got some situations like you've got burial plots back home and you do want to be buried back home, your death and dying documentation has to also line up and be changed when you repatriate and when you come back. And so that's a very important thing. And just staying up with all of the paperwork is, for a family, it can be quite exhausting. Well, that's from somebody who is not a paperwork expert. How about for you? Did you get that birth certificate back, and was it hard?
We had to jump through a lot of hoops. Like, thankfully, we still had Japanese friends on the other side that were able to get in touch with these agencies. Otherwise, I think we would have had to hire someone as, a translator or whatever it was. But so we did get them back, but there was just so many. It took a long time. Mm-hmm. And it was difficult because we had to then get proof that it was, even though it was a copy, it was official, et cetera, et cetera. So it's one reason just to be organized on the front end, because we are very organized people and this happened to us. So I feel like the more organized you can be, the less likely these types of things are to happen, because I hear stories from all kinds of people about different similar type situations where, well, I just had no idea. So figuring out these things in advance can make life a lot easier.
So moving on to the next one. Thank you, Linda, for that. That's great. Moving on to the next one. Finding a new home. Are you going to be renting? Are you going to be in company accommodation? Are you going to be Airbnb-ing for a while? Are you going to be buying in a new location? All these factors to consider. Of course, housing is a big one, and you probably are already dreaming about what you would love to consider in that area. But things that you must consider is the cost of living, the neighborhood, schools, amenities, resources, house hunting from abroad is not always easy. It's easier now than it's ever been. Online listings, real estate agents, and there's all sorts of different ways of buying real estate nowadays. So it's just really important to catch up on that.
You know, one thing that I learned, if I can just jump in here, we tended to move back and buy a place. But at one point, we moved somewhere that we had never lived before, even though it was back in our home country. And we just decided to rent for a year because, well, it wasn't quite a year, but we decided to rent for a bit so that we could get a feel for the neighborhoods and whatnot. Because, you know, there's times when you make a decision, and those of us that are globally mobile don't often know how long we're going to be in a place. But, you know, your home is so important that sometimes it's better not to rush into it if you have some leeway.
I had interviewed a lot of people for the next book that you and I are also collaborating somewhat on, and it's going to be called Sequel or Unsettled, which is
Unsettled sequel.
the unsettled sequel, which is what repatriation sometimes can be. And the most organized person that I've ever talked to and ever met was someone, and they made a decision to rent for a year in a place, although they knew where they wanted to go. They wanted to be in a certain district because of their family, and they were moving back to be close to family. They were the clearest, and I thought, you know, that really makes a lot of sense. It really makes a lot of sense. And we kind of did that when we moved to Mexico. We tried several different neighborhoods. So I think getting a taste of different neighborhoods, and there's different ways you can do that now with all the Airbnbs and pet sitting, and so you can test neighborhoods and find out what is the best fit for you. Because as soon as you find things that truly fit and land in your soul, you're going to settle better. The next thing, not finally, but emotional and philosophical aspects. Leaving a place you call home. How sad is that? How happy is that? Saying goodbye to people, saying goodbye to friends, colleagues, familiar surroundings. All the mixed emotions of excitement and nostalgia. This is the biggest one that we talk about, I think. Linda, what do you think?
I think it is. And that's part of the reason why we're going to even make it a theme for a whole week.
Yeah, that's true.
The farewells.
That's true. Yes, there's a lot we could say about that. So we'll just leave that there right now. And the following one, number 6, cultural adjustment. Another one that we'll be talking about more, discussing, you know, the difference between cultural competencies back home, cultural communication back home, and cultural intelligence, and how they're all different and how they all operate differently. And reintegrating, how are you going to reintegrate into your home country when it has changed and the people have changed? But beyond everything, you have changed. You are a new, unrepeatable person. You have had unrepeatable experiences in your lifetime. And so how do you bring those back, pack them up, and navigate the cultural differences and the changes in society?
Do I dare whisper the secret little phrase that nobody ever wants to hear about?
Yes.
Reverse culture shock.
Yes, that dirty topic that we love and hate at the same time. Yes.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that later in the month.
Yes, we will. And also, finally, I would say I would count this in logistics, although it's not exactly logistics, but building a new life, you know, establishing your new routines. What is your sense? Where's your sense of normalcy going to come from? How are you going to reconnect with people, and embracing all the new opportunities and all the challenges that go along with having a fresh start? and how fortunate you are that you still have an amazing life that you can work with and build and move through this very special time that Linda and I believe can be some of the most productive of your life.
I think it's really important that you brought up the farewells and the, thinking ahead to what you want to make of the next chapter, because with the logistics, we get really wrapped up in the, what do I need to do here? What do I need to do there? The tick list. Those of us that love spreadsheets, the spreadsheets can grow and expand for hours and days.
Yes.
So I think it's important to remember that there are other things that you're also going to want to focus on that are perhaps a little softer, so to speak. And so I'm glad that you mentioned them in the discussion of logistics so that people can keep in mind that they need to budget time and energy and perhaps a little money as well for those things.
And so I would say that the estimated number of people who are living overseas now and who will be repatriating is, as of a few years ago, it was like almost 300 million people. And the average cost of an international move, it varies greatly, but somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000. But I've also heard that 100,000 is very common for a family. And the percentage of individuals who experience reverse culture shock upon returning home, we have seen statistics of 65% and over. And perhaps that's just the number of people who own up to it.
Right. That's a really good point.
So that's it for today. Any comments before we close, Linda?
I just think that I'm glad that you're highlighting all these things for people to think about, because everyone's situation is unique and you really have to custom tailor what we've shared to your own situation. But hopefully hearing a bit about what we've gone through and what you're sharing, it's just a bit of a leg up.
Yes, thanks everybody for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.